The script is done 866 words within the 900 plus or minus 5% target. Full flow intact, hook callback pattern interrupt all landed at the right beats. Here it is. There is a line item called the Office of the Chaplain Fund. It appears in no law you've read by name, and it has been paid out without interruption since 1789. Every session of Congress opens with a prayer. Someone writes that prayer. Someone gets paid for it. That someone has a staff, an office, and a budget line buried inside a bill so large that no member of Congress has ever cast a vote on it by name. You were never told this fund exists. You've been paying for it your entire life. Here's what it actually is in plain terms. The House and the Senate each employ a chaplain, a salaried federal employee, same as a park ranger or a postal worker, except this employee's job is religious. They open every session with prayer, council members privately, and run an office funded through what's called the Legislative Branch Appropriations Act. That act runs hundreds of pages. The chaplain's funding is one paragraph inside it. It is never debated separately. It is never voted on alone. It simply renews year after year, folded into a bill members are voting on for 1,000 other reasons. Now here's how it survived when it should have been struck down. The Constitution's Establishment Clause says Congress cannot establish a religion. A paid clergyman opening every legislative session with prayer looks, on its face, exactly like that. No legislature voted to create an exception. No statute carved one out. What happened instead was 1983, the Supreme Court case Marsh versus Chambers. The court didn't ask whether legislative prayer violated the Constitution under the normal test. It asked whether the practice was old enough. Because Congress had funded chaplains since the first Congress in 1789, the same generation that wrote the First Amendment, the court ruled history itself was the justification, not the text, not a vote. Age. That ruling created a doctrine legal scholars call the history and tradition exception, and once it existed, it stopped being about the chaplain at all. It became a template. Complication. Control of this exception doesn't sit with Congress anymore, it sits with whoever can prove a practice is old enough to be grandfathered past the Constitution. The chaplain's office itself is almost incidental now. It's the precedent that matters, and the precedent belongs to the courts, not to voters, not to the people funding it every April. Remember, no one voted for this. Not the doctrine, not the fund it protects, not the exception carved out on your behalf without your name ever appearing on a ballot. And here's the part that should actually worry you, it's completely legal. This doctrine doesn't stay contained to prayer. Once the Supreme Court established that a sufficiently old practice can bypass ordinary constitutional scrutiny, it became the argument used to defend other unaccountable traditions, closed-door legislative sessions, ceremonial oaths, ratified customs nobody can point to a statute for. The Chaplain Fund is the small, sympathetic example everyone nods along to. Nobody wants to defund a prayer. But the mechanism protecting it, the idea that history alone can immunize a government practice from the document that supposedly governs it, has been cited in cases that have nothing to do with religion at all. Picture it this way. An ordinary citizen challenges a federal practice as unconstitutional. The government's defense isn't that the practice is fair or necessary or even popular. The defense is simply that it's old, and under Marsh, that defense can win. The chaplain who prays over Congress each morning is, legally speaking, the same precedent that can be invoked to protect practices you've never heard of, run by agencies you've never heard of, none of which required a single vote to exist the way they currently do. And here is why it cannot be repealed the way a normal law can. You cannot vote out a Supreme Court precedent. There is no bill members can pass to undo Marsh versus Chambers, only a future court, deciding to overturn its own prior ruling, which courts are built to avoid doing. Congress can end the chaplain's funding line tomorrow if it wants to. That would not touch the doctrine underneath it. The doctrine survives the fund. It survives every Congress that ever votes. It sits outside the legislative process entirely, waiting to be pointed at the next old practice someone wants shielded. Which tells you something uncomfortable about every other institution you assume runs on votes and statutes. If a 200-year-old prayer can outrun the Constitution simply by being old, age itself is a form of legal armor, and armor like that doesn't ask permission before it's used again. Every agency, every custom, every quiet practice that predates modern scrutiny now has a blueprint for immunity that requires no legislature, no ballot, and no public record of ever having been approved. So the next time someone tells you a government practice is fine because it's always been done that way, ask yourself what else is hiding behind that same sentence, and who decided that being old was the same thing as being lawful. Save to home /jarvisadmin/hidden chaplain fund script, txt.